Hello, Jeffrey, can you hear me? Hello, Mary.
Hi, Tracy. How's it going?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Were you able to join any of the other sessions today?
I've been trying to watch the keynotes. I've struggled with some of them because I have meetings. I'm trying to multitask, but yeah, I've watched some of them.
Oh, that's great. I know it has been really amazing. For our first virtual conference, it certainly has come together really, really well.
Yeah, I like the virtual conference. It it democratizes the whole space a little better. I mean, like at DevOps World and CDCon, there were people from all over the world that showed up.
Yeah.
It's a nice way for us to showcase New Mexico.
It's been great. Absolutely. Absolutely. And tech and beyond. And it certainly has been beyond as well.
Yeah. So you just let me know when my time is to start, and I will go.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're on a little early, so we'll certainly wait. I know folks are jumping on, so let's see, what time is it? Oh, we have plenty of time. It's only 12:08.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have a clock in here. I usually look at
Oh,
my machine, my PC, but I can't because of the way it looks. I don't have
sure.
it doesn't have my little clock at the bottom.
No problem. Well, we'll wait definitely a few more moments for folks to log on. How's the weather in Santa Fe?
Beautiful,
Yeah, it's beautiful
beautiful.
here. Beautiful in Albuquerque today too.
I'm hoping that we get rain though.
How much snow did you guys get last week?
We got about 5 inches.
I thought it was amazing.
Yeah,
I
I just wasn't ready for the volume. I was hoping for a dusting. We have horses up here. It adds a new dimension. And I was out of town. I went to Silver City for a few days. We went hiking out there and just got away before we're locked in for winter. And we came home on that Monday, and I went from 75, almost 80 degrees to snow.
Oh
I
my
just wasn't
God.
ready.
We did kind of jump through some seasons there pretty quickly.
Wouldn't you
Pretty darn.
say? What happened to fall?
No, we skipped right
We're
over
back in
fall.
summer, kind of. I'm in
Well,
short
yeah, I
sleeves.
mean, but would you expect anything else in the year 2020? Come on.
I wouldn't. I
That's
wouldn't.
my answer to everything.
I know. An unusual year, no doubt.
Well, it's about 11 minutes after Tracy, so we still have plenty of time for folks to continue to jump on.
Okie doke. And I see you are recording this. Are you guys going to post them all up on YouTube or somewhere?
Yeah, so they are going to be posted as long as you're okay with that, Tracy.
100%.
Okay,
100%.
great. Yeah, and just so that anyone who's on or for your information too, Tracy, if you've missed a session, because there are so many great sessions that are happening back to back on top of each other, they are going to be recorded as long as we have permission from the presenter. And they'll be posted up on the Socio platform. So you just go right back in and click and rewatch them. And then I believe Ava's going to transfer them all over to YouTube. So they'll still be alive and available on the experienceIT website, as far as I know. So
Great. The other benefit about having virtual conferences, because you know how expensive it is to hire a production company to come in and record every speaker at a conference.
I know, I know. You know, this platform has certainly, let me just turn that off as well.
Yeah.
This platform has certainly worked out really well for us. The Socio platform. Not that I'm doing a commercial for them, I know, but Ava's done a great job pulling it all together on the platform. So yeah, so the keynote, were you able to jump on for the keynote this morning, Tracy?
No, I was not.
No, I know you were on yesterday with Paul
Yes.
Boris.
Yeah, I spent more time yesterday than today. My morning was just fulfilled. This morning I had a ton of meetings.
Yeah, that seemed to be the case. And we had that from a lot of folks who were registering. They came back and said, hey, you know, the 4th looks great. The 5th is a little, it's going to be a little more of a challenge for me to join on the 5th. So we were expecting a little lighter attendance today, but for the most part, most of the sessions have had a really great attendance, 12 to 15 people. Some of them even went up to 20, a little bit more in a couple of the others. But for the most part, the sessions have had really, really good attendance even today. So
well, that's the best part about having them recorded and posted, because then we can, you know, I do a lot of social networking and, you know, tweeting and LinkedIn, and we get the word out that way.
Yeah, even for me, I know that there's a few that I was hoping to be able to hear, and you know, and I was in one or the other sessions. So, and there are times when I had 2 devices on and was really actually engaging in 2 different sessions at once. But I can't wait to go back and re-listen to some of them. So, such great information. I've learned so much over the last couple of days.
Well, that's what this is all about.
Yeah, that's what it definitely. And I think it was really awesome to add the healthcare and the space this year. That was something that we were pretty excited about. So
yeah, I actually tweeted out some of your smart communities, because I do have people in my network that work for the city of Denver. Actually, quite a few people who work for cities, and I did tweet out some of those.
oh, thank you. We appreciate that so much. Well, it is right now 12:15.
Then let's get started.
You want to go ahead and get started? Okay, great. Well, I will go ahead and we'll go ahead and kick it off. Thanks for everyone for being here. Welcome to the DevOps in a Modern Architecture session. Tracy, we look forward to hearing from you. We're excited for your presentation. And we would just ask that, I believe we have everyone muted, but if you haven't muted yourself, if you would go ahead and hit that mute. We encourage you to ask questions through the chat. And Tracy, it's up to you. Do you want to be able to pause and answer those questions, or do you want folks to wait until the end of your presentation to engage?
They can ask questions at any point in time. I am totally okay with that. They just need to remember to unmute and then ask the question and then mute back, just so we eliminate any background noise.
Okay, we appreciate that. So with that, Tracy, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mary, and I want to thank the New Mexico Tech Council for inviting me to this. I really enjoy this particular, it's becoming a New Mexico tradition, and it's exciting to have a New Mexico tradition that is around technology. We have some many brilliant people in the state, and I feel like sometimes that our brilliance is not showcased. So I'm glad that we're doing it. I'm glad that we were able to do this even during COVID, and that we have a virtual platform to work through. All right, let me see here. So yes, I am Tracy Reagan. I live in just outside the crazy little town of Madrid. I am a microservice evangelist. I am super passionate about configuration management and continuous deployment. I am the co-founder of a company called Deploy Hub. I was recently listed as one of the top 100 DevOps visionaries by Tech Beacon, which was a really big deal. It was very exciting to see my name up there with people like Jez Humble and Gene Kim. I was a founding member of the Eclipse Foundation, so I'm not new to open source, and I was also recruited to help build the new CD Foundation, which is the Continuous Delivery Foundation, which lives under the Linux organization. And Linux is where you find, the Linux organization is a huge open source consortium where you find now Kubernetes under this, under the umbrella of Cloud Native. I'm also a DevOps Institute ambassador, and I have about a little over 20 years of experience in DevOps, even though when I first started in it, it wasn't called DevOps. It was oftentimes called Application Lifecycle Management, and it's still what we really do in DevOps. So some takeaways from this presentation, what you're going to learn. You're going to learn that continuous delivery is the heart of DevOps, and that will continue in a modern architecture. When we think about the future of DevOps, continuous delivery will really be the heartbeat. And CD will become more essential as we move to high frequency releases, which are required for microservices. And for most organizations, microservices are going to change the way we do development in a very big way. It's extremely disruptive, and it's going to cause you to have more repositories and more workflows. If you're using something like a Jenkins, that's going to increase, and there's some things that we need to think about in terms of fixing that. And configuration management, the essence of how we put a software application together is going to be lost, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's just first try to define DevOps. We hear this term, it's thrown around. I'm going to go ahead and give it my best shot in 3 bullet points to really define what DevOps is. So DevOps really started as a way for developers and operations to collaborate better. There's always been a wall between developer and operation, and the concept of DevOps really changed that. And in fact, it created the term site reliability engineers, where the person who was responsible for taking an application all the way to production was assigned to a particular application team, bringing operations farther left, shifting it left into development. So automation of the release handoff became critical for that, because there had to be some accountability. Even if there was an SRE working on a particular application team, they may actually have answered to somebody on the production side of the house. So it's a hybrid kind of position. So automation became more critical so that there was audit trails and way of tracking things. And in my opinion, like I said, in my introduction, it's a better way of saying application lifecycle management. It's just being done again more at the development and less at the production side, even though production has ownership. And what makes it work is continuous delivery. So if we define continuous delivery, this is right out of the CD Foundation's definition. Continuous delivery is a software engineering approach in which teams produce software in short cycles, ensuring that the software can be reliably released at any time. They even point out here that the rise of microservices, cloud native architectures has caused a corollary rise in continuous delivery practices. I like to call it DevOps at scale. When we are pushing more pieces and parts into production, we're having to do it more efficiently, and we're having to do it at scale. So the related CI/CD that includes, this concept that we used to call continuous integration, and the practice of merging developer work is kind of changing, but it's still core to the continuous delivery message. So let's think about what's driving DevOps and what's driving the change in DevOps and what DevOps is going to look like in the modern architecture and why it's different. And it has to do with microservices. Don't know how many of you have started looking at Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is a container orchestration engine or platform. That's very cool. It allows, the benefit of modern architecture is the ability to do auto scaling and to be completely fault tolerant. In a Kubernetes environment, you create something called a pod. And a pod is a collection of containers. And for a single pod, you can say, I want you to scale to a certain level. And I want you, if you die, I want you to replicate yourself immediately. So you never have downtime, and you always have the ability to service a customer that's coming in and interacting with that pod. Now, what most companies do is they start in the beginning, they start with containerizing their monolithic application, which means that the monolithic is installed into your node and your pods. Microservices changes that. Microservices says break apart your application and let the microservices live in containers and be loosely coupled and talk via APIs at runtime. Now, this is a big market. This $1.9 billion growth rate that's been predicted by researcher markets, that is post-COVID. So even with in our current economy, this particular market is growing. And the reason why is because it gives you some core operational savings. You get, an increase in computing power and a reduction in cost from 20 to 50%. And as most developers would tell you, they believe that in the next 5 years, they will be using microservices as their default architecture. So it's no longer a matter of if people are going to go to this new massive kind of disruptive architecture, it's just when. I am sure that your companies will be going there as well. It will be the default way of writing applications. So let's think of microservice. The best way to see them is functions. Instead of having a monolithic application, you're going to slice and dice that application out. And what you're going to end up with are microservices that can be reused across the organization. This is the core function or the core benefit of microservices. So let's say you have in this example down here, let's say you have a cart service and you write websites for companies who want to sell products. You could write a single cart service and have it reused across multiple application teams. Now you may do that today in a library kind of way, pulling it into your jar file. But in microservices, if you have a problem with your cart service, you fix it in one place and everybody consuming that particular microservice gets it. Now, the other thing to think about with microservices is that they're immutable. You don't copy over a microservice like you do a jar file when you do a deployment. You always have the old one's always out there until you deprecate it. And when you manage them inside the cluster, you may do so with namespaces or what we call labels. So this is different. I tell people the difference between the tsunami of change that we're seeing in microservices is equal to what we went through 20 years ago when we said we're going to move off the mainframe and start doing things in a distributed environment. That's the change, and that's how different it is. That's how disruptive it is, but it's worth the journey. So if you think about just what a microservice should look like, a microservice should implement a set of strongly related functions, meaning that if there are several things that microservice does, you potentially want to package it together. And the service should be able to be changed without having an adverse impact with the clients that consume them. And each team that owns one or more service must be able to do so independently. Now, these are, some may say these are lofty ideas. Some of these we will achieve, some we won't. But the goal is to create a standard infrastructure of common libraries that your enterprise can consume at the application level. And any of those foundational libraries, if one needs to be fixed, if there's a security issue in one, you fix it in one place and everybody gets it at the same time. And microservices they've reached the, when you see a Dilbert cartoon about microservices and Kubernetes, you know that it's reached a certain level. And when you achieve agile, when you're really trying to achieve business agility, let's talk about business agility, not just being agile, because agile's been used quite a bit. But when you want to achieve business agility, you need to be able to move from doing software releases weekly or even daily to all the time. And we can't have that all the time on it, hourly or even more frequently, driven by emails and spreadsheets. Because microservices are released with such a high frequency, we have to understand ways to achieve this business agility and meet DevOps at scale. And that is what we have to think about in the future of DevOps. How do we automate it? How do we scale it? Because we're no longer going to have the luxury of time to take our massive monolithic application and push it through the life cycle. So if you think about what we're doing is we're taking our wine glass, that's our application, and we're busting it apart and pointing to the pieces laying on the table and saying, that's your wine glass. That's in essence what we're doing. Now, some of the things that are disrupted in our standard continuous delivery process when we do this. First of all, code branching and merging is minimized. We've done a lot of work in teaching everybody how to use things like Git, GitLab, GitHub, and we'll continue to use them. But you're not going to have one piece of code that's 3,000 lines long. You're going to have a piece of code that's 300 lines long. How much branching and merging we'll be doing on a 300-line piece of code? Probably not very much. Continuous integration is no longer critical. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But think about the fact that when you build a monolithic, what's important is to know that you can always compile. When you have a microservice, Python's not even compiled. It's interpreted. Automation of the full lifecycle process from dev through testing through production has to be automated. We have to get to a place in our DevOps journey that production is willing to consume the developer's deployment process. Or we can say it another way, the deployment process needs to be repeatable from dev through prod, which means that we need to start extrapolating data from definition. And continuous release will be a key to success. If you cannot achieve a release all the way from dev through production and you continue with a wall, you're going to have a bottleneck and you're not going to be able to support the DevOps at scale that's required for microservices. So let's just talk a bit about check and emerging again. Like I said, code will be, short, smaller pieces of code. Developers will not work on a single piece of code for days and then worry about merging it and then compiling it to see if it still compiles. We don't think, branching is going to be much of an issue anymore either. Branching is important in working in a monolithic and managing different sprints, but it's a monolithic concept that we probably will see fade over the course of the next several years. Now, what will change though, and what will become a much bigger conversation is this mono versus poly repositories. Now, the reason why we're going to discuss this is because microservices are independently deployed. And if they're independently deployed, you probably want them to have their own repository, because oftentimes your repository is directly connected to your workflow, whether you're using a Jenkins or a commercial solution like Circle CI. That's generally how you're building things out. Now you can manage microservices in a mono a repo where you're just putting them all into that one single repository, but that means you're going to have more manual work in terms of labeling these services. So there's more manual work at the check-in step than there would be if you had it poly. So again, it's a matter of balancing that risk and control. And everybody's going to make their own decision. But normally when I'm in a physical place and I ask the question, hey guys, who's doing mono, who's doing poly? There's not too many people raising their hand for mono. So let's talk a little bit about continuous integration, because we hear the term CI and CD, and I think it's important to discuss it because CI is changing. So in the beginning, when we did continuous integration, what we were doing is we were executing a checkout. Somebody checked in a piece of code, and the goal was to check out that piece of code and run the compile to make sure that it didn't break the build. 10-minute builds or less was what everybody was striving for. That was the core reason why we did continuous integration. What we were striving for is that any time that we had somebody check in code and we could pull it out and compile it, we always had an available release candidate at any point in time that somebody checked in code. That was what continuous integration was all about. But the reality of builds in a microservices world is that the builds are now very different. Because we have smaller code, we have much smaller builds. I think everybody will achieve the 10-minute build in a microservice world. And in fact, many of the tools like Python, which is one of the most popular languages for microservices, is interpreted. So there's no compile step. Now, you may have a compile step if you're using something like Golang, and that's becoming increasingly more popular, but you're still just compiling that little tiny piece of code, and you're not doing any linking, because all the linking is done at runtime, not at compile time. So you're not doing a compile and link anymore, you're just really doing a compile, and lo and behold, the link step, it's done at runtime, which is kind of scary, to be quite honest. And the build process, when you do your CI process in the future, it will go through the steps of pulling the code out of Python or Go, whatever language they may be using, JS, pulling it out of a GitHub repository or some kind of repository, compiling it if it's required, possibly pulling down additional libraries. If you're using Python, you might use something like a JFrog to sort out what the transitive dependencies are for your function, and you build a container. And that container that has that function then is registered to a container registry. And that's where things become interesting, because now you have a potential candidate that's compiled, that's your new binary, that should be pushed farther down the workflow. But let's look at what our workflow looks like. Today, our workflow is monolithic. Think about it as a puzzle. You're putting a puzzle together. In a monolithic, you're not only compiling, but you're linking the puzzle together. And because you're linking the puzzle together, you're tracking a few things. You're tracking the application version, and you might track a bill of material report that shows everything that went into that compile. That way you can do a diff report that shows the difference between two builds. And you know what version you have in dev, you know what version you have in test, and you know what version you have in prod. It's all kind of simple. And each application has its own workflow, so you don't have a lot of workflows. But when we go from monolith to microservices, we're really taking a different approach to how the application lives. We are going from a static application to a highly dynamic application that's broken into these smaller puzzle pieces. And each of those puzzle pieces are deployed independently. And each of those puzzle pieces are not linked until API at runtime. So your impact is pretty drastic to your continuous delivery process. And these are the things you really should start thinking about today, because you don't want to wait until developers are writing microservices and then try to fix it. You need to start really having internal conversations about how this is going to look. So microservices are deployed independently, and they can be shared across teams. So any one of these workflows that have this small puzzle piece could be impacting multiple application teams. So at some point, you need to be able to have a workflow that says, hey, I have an update to a microservice, and I now need to test 15 applications. But that's difficult because we lose the application. We lose the concept of an application, and we lose the concept of impact analysis. And these are the kinds of the configuration management discussions that we need to be having, because they held our world together in monolithic, and they will continue to hold our world together in microservices. We have to make sure that we're still doing a decent amount of configuration management in order to make this new world work. Now, only about 15% of companies report this massive success with microservices. And in my opinion, I believe it's because of this puzzle problem. This problem of managing all these little microservices moving at a high frequency basis without any configuration management it can be a nightmare. But the industry, we will address it as we grow. So think about it this way. in our old world, we had a single microservice that would get pushed out and to dev, test, and prod. And I'm sorry, we'd have a single application that would get pushed out nice and tidy to dev, test, and prod. In a microservices world, that single application is broken into different services. And we're having to manage the moving parts of that application. And oftentimes, we don't know if they're talking appropriately, the link step, until we get them out to production, or let's just say runtime, because you could push it out to development and certainly find out that it didn't work. Now, one of the odd things I'm hearing, which I haven't heard in a long time, and everybody's heard this term, is it worked on my machine. If you think about developers who used to have a server underneath their desk, they would compile everything, they'd run it on their server, they'd do some basic testing, they'd push it over to the test team to do QA. QA would have problems. And the developer would say, well, I don't know, it worked on my machine. Now what we're hearing, well, I don't know, it worked on my cluster. When you hear this kind of a response and you're having these kind of problems, what you're having a problem with is a lack of configuration management to understand and control each of these workflows, pushing these little tiny functions out and impacting the runtime environment. So in terms of your CD pipelines, in terms of what you're using, a Circle CI or a CodeFresh or something newer like a Spinnaker, what you need to be thinking about is templates, because you don't want to have, I mean, let's look, Netflix has got 4,000 microservices or more. You don't want to have 4,000 workflows. What we need to get to is a place where we separate the data from the definition, even at the workflow level, so that you can have 5 standard workflows. And depending on the complexity or the security level of a particular microservice or a risk factor, it determines which workflow it's going to go through. In other words, we're going to have smarter continuous delivery. And we're going to have smarter continuous deployment. So while CI becomes less critical, the deployment process becomes more critical. And some of what we're doing at the CI level in monolithic, linking the code, dissolves when we go into microservices. So being able to get it out to a cluster and be able to test it, we'll have some challenges. And what I'm hearing right now from many SREs that I talk to in my journey around Deploy Hub is that they're waiting for an incident report before they realize there's a problem, and that's backwards. So automation is going to be critical, and more configuration management is going to be essential. So just like the workflow, the deployment process is the same way. Because each microservice is independently deployable, they have their own repository, they have their own workflow, and they have their own cadence when they march to production, or they march to dev, or they march to test. Now, each one of those impacts the application that is consuming it. And we don't even know what that application looks like because we don't have it anymore. So configuration management is going to be more essential in order to manage these kinds of environments. We're hearing new terms like haunted graveyard, Frankenstein clusters, and just simple questions. I have a microservice that's been running out there. Is anybody consuming it? Can I get rid of it? Microservice sprawl is an issue. And the fact that your application goes away is a problem, because everything we think about is in monolithic is in terms of a version of your application. New to this world, and this is a super critical one, folks, if you're going to go into a microservices architecture, the very best place to start is to start building out your domain structure. What pieces of your overall, what libraries do you want to build? What if you were to decompose 2 or 3 of your applications running at your company, you're going to find out that maybe as much as 80% has been written over and over and over. You take that and you build out domains. You might have a domain for standard routines for database calls. You may have a domain for standard logging, error logging. You may have a domain for security and user sign-on that everybody can then reuse. But you have to sit down and you have to understand, when you decompose this that's where you're going, because that's going to save you some work in the long run. It's going to start allowing you and your microservice developers and your application teams to understand what is reusable. Now, finding and sharing them are a different story, and that's partly what we do at Deploy Hub and the open source project Ortelius. But the point is you need to start thinking about microservices in terms of solution spaces. What do you need for your organization that can be reused across multiple teams? There are many new tools out there that are being talked about. There's a lot of very interesting companies that have contributed open source tools around this problem. Spinnaker is one that Netflix created, and they're AWS customer. And all of these really are about deploying your Kubernetes environment, defining your nodes and pods. There's another one called Argo CD, which was written by the great people at Intuit that does something similar. And there's also these, really smart guys who sit and wrote some stuff, and it became popular. And that's the case with Helm. Helm creates your container image. It's scripted. It's a scripting process that allows you to define what you're going to put in your container and how that is deployed out to a Kubernetes environment. They're called Helm files or Helm charts, and they create a standard way, a template, to release a particular container. You're probably gonna learn a lot about Helm over the years in the future. Ortelius. Now, I know some of you have been to my talks before at experienceIT, and I told you probably 3 years ago that we were going to start an open source community, and I was hoping that some of you would join. I haven't seen a single New Mexican yet. I'm still hopeful, but we have built a really nice open source community and a product that is the core of our Deploy Hub product called Ortelius. Ortelius does dependency mapping and data visualization of your microservices. It helps put that logical application back together so you have a way to view it, and you have a way to view the versions of the microservices that your logical application is consuming, and you can see it across clusters. So my plug here is, if any of you are out there right now, if you're a UNM student, if you have never been part of a open source community, if you're, even if you're in marketing, open source has a home for you. And this project is born in New Mexico, and we would love to have more people from New Mexico contributing to it. It's pretty exciting to have this. It's gotten quite a bit of traction, and we see a bright future for it. Istio. Istio is a brand new kind of way. Think about it as request routing. It manages your service, the routing of your microservices. It routes the traffic flow, it manages policies, and it does monitoring and feedback. And then there are tools on top of Istio that have been built, like Kiali, that helps you track transactions between two microservices at a cluster level. Not a lot of companies have gone the service mesh route just yet, but as I speak to people, more and more people are starting to investigate service mesh, and it will become an important part of this story. So let's just talk about how it will become important. It's my belief that right now, remember I said we had a lot of different clusters, just like we had a lot of different servers. Well, we're going to start consolidating those clusters, because many clusters is expensive. And it's not necessarily expensive to have hosted somewhere, but it's expensive to manage and maintain them. Istio has the ability to have a single cluster. And just dream with me down this path for a little way as what we see for the future. It has the ability to have one cluster, and every microservice that you ever needed to install is in there. And if you have a new version of a microservice, you push it out, creates a new version of your application, and Istio can route to personas. So in the same cluster, you could have dev and test running. Now, we would never do that in a physical environment, and we probably wouldn't even do it in a cloud environment. But in a new Kubernetes cloud native environment, we do have the ability to do that, and I believe that that's where we'll be going. Now, the first time I ever said this, people looked at me like I was green, and then I went to a meetup that was held by Descartes Labs at the Santa Fe incubator, and he did this big presentation on Spinnaker. And then he said, okay, guys, I'm going to show you something that we're doing at Descartes Labs that has reduced the number of clusters. We now have dev and test all running out of the same cluster while we have production still in a separate cluster. And that's when I realized that the vision I see for products like Istio is a reality, because Descartes Labs, who's a big user of Google, GKE, they have seen how minimizing the number of clusters and using some sort of a routing solves a lot of the problems. So see that in a DevOps future. So let's just say welcome to your new DevOps pipeline. We'll just go through it really quick here. Products like Jira and GitHub issues, or Service Desk, whatever you're using, will still be out there. You'll still make updates, and you'll get some sort of code complete status at your repository level. That's when things begin to change. Instead of creating a big fat binary and having bomb reports and impact analysis reports, you're going to create a container, and that container is going to hold a small function. At that point in time, products like Ortelius will pull together and do automated configuration management, so that you know that that particular container that just got updated impacted 5 applications, and now you have new versions for 5 applications. And it does that based on things like your what they call the digest, the container digest, and the container and the digest tag. That gives us a unique number to say this particular microservice is unique, and it's being consumed by these particular logical applications. Once that happens, you may be using something like Helm, called by Deploy Hub or Ortelius to actually push your new container out to the environment. You might be using Istio to do that request routing. Then that gets pushed through the cycle. When it gets over to your test environments and your production environments, you're going to have still another step to push that out. Again, something like Ortelius would call something like Helm and use routing through Istio to do that. Most companies right now haven't gotten to the Istio, and most companies are managing about 10 to 15 microservices, and we're finding that's when most of the problems start happening, especially around the configuration management. And at that, I thank you so much for having me, and I hope next year we'll have more to tell you about the Ortelius project that was born in New Mexico. And again, if you've ever thought about it, please, please, please reach out to me. Send me an email at tracy@deployhub.com. I would love very much to have some of my fellow New Mexicans. Actually, we have one. We have one person who recently joined. He's going to graduate from UNM in December, and he did sign up for our Ortelius project. So I'm very excited about having somebody from UNM. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Yeah, Tracy, thanks so much. I have been watching the chat, and Tony placed a question in the chat. He's been discussing in his open groups microservice architecture project, and has been project has
Hey,
been
Tony,
what
let's why don't we just
would you like me to?
Yeah.
Oh, Tony, thank you
I
for
would. That works.
I'm so sorry that the typing in the chat is a bit small, so it's challenging for my little vision. But thank you so much, Tony. Yes, go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
I do have very old eyes. Hey, Tracy. Great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm not hugely involved in the microservice work at Open Group. I'm more of a security guy, but I have been helping write if you're a TOGAF shop, how do you think about microservices? And one of the questions that enterprise architects at least should be thinking about is this landscape across an organization of microservices, and how to avoid some of the graveyard and other problems you've talked about. And one of the notions that commercially, there were a number of products that are practically none at all successful for catalogs. So is Ortelius going to be an answer to that? Is that what you're hoping, or something else?
Yes, in fact, Ortelius does have a domain design to it. So you can define domains, and those domains can have subdomains. And in what we sell as Deploy Hub Pro, you can put security around those domains so that you can have a catalog to publish those microservices. So a microservice developer would publish their microservice to a specific domain inside of Ortelius. Now, when I say that, we don't intend to be any kind of a repository for a container like a Docker Hub.
Right.
Instead, we're just going to have a pointer to it. It says, hey, you're there. This is being stored in Docker Hub. We pull out from that. We know it's being stored there. We pull out all of those things like the SHA, the digest, and we also track what was used to be used to deploy it. Are you using a Helm chart? Are you using a Galaxy role? Are you using an operator? Are you using some other, homegrown script to deploy this? Are you using Spinnaker? We can integrate with that to do the deployment. So what we create is a central hub in that domain structure, a central hub or catalog of microservices along with their deployment metadata and required logic. Now, at the environment level, we call that a component. And at that component, you can define things like key valued pairs for deploying it to dev, test, and prod, for example, so that when it does go out to a specific environment, what is different between those is substituted. So we do separate the data from definition at that level, because we're working towards a catalog that has repeatability to it.
Okay, thanks. Sounds like something we might have an offline discussion about at some point.
And again, if you want to be part of the Ortelius project, we're having a lot of these discussions. Ortelius is out. We have, Deploy Hub has some big enterprise customers,
Okay.
and Ortelius is out there. So, but we're so excited about bringing in people with experience and have talked about this problem, so we can really build out that roadmap at the open source level.
Okay, I'll reach out to you on LinkedIn.
That would be great.
Thank you, Tony, for that question. Does anyone else have questions for Tracy? You can just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. All right.
Well, thank you, Mary. This was great.
Thank
I
you,
very much
Tracy.
enjoyed
this
it.
was amazing. And you know what? Maybe the New Mexico Technology Council can also help find folks who are interested in your project too. So let's talk about that offline. How we
that would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And this is the last session for today until next year. And hopefully we'll be back in person next year. And of course, we'll have you, Tracy, every year at experienceIT, sharing all of that. So with that, if there are no other questions, then we'll go ahead and close the session. And again, they will be available on the Socio platform. So if you'd like to go back and hear more or hear others that you missed, we encourage you to do that. So, all right, well, listen, everybody have a great day. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Tracy.